The Dominican blowout was one of the things that I learned. I was like, I can't compare with.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
After this one also with the rain and then after.
Yeah, I didn't have to do nothing. I just getting the blowout was one of the things that I learned. I was like, I can't compare with. Oh my gosh.
All right.
After this one also with the rain and
I can go find that.
Is that?
Nope.
Here. I can go find that.
How about that? I don't know that we ever arrived at any actual, conclusion in our discussion at the table last week regarding some of the questions I had about practices. Actually, I think what it did is framed in a statement, so maybe what I need to do is frame these questions. I had, just. Do you want help in that? Let me keep this, actually one. So, as we stated, there is no, AFR published yet. It's reasonable, like we generally don't see that until later on in the summer, or rather in the fall. I imagine by, this time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, we'll probably see something that's nothing unusual. So I don't want to frame it for anybody who's watching as some sort of unreasonable delay. This happens every year. And I did get some of the preliminary numbers when Kevin and you and I met back in August, towards the end of August. But some of I went back just to the most recent AFR that's available, which is the 2021. And the reason being is because the AFR tells us what our plan was at the beginning and also where we landed. And what I was referring to last week was, if you look at the front, and I'm sorry, this honestly is the way that it printed off from the DOE website. So some of the pages you have to kind of go to the second page to connect the words to the numbers. So on the first page, you see sort of a listing of revenues. Second page, you see the actual revenues, almost as if it was a printing of a larger scale page. We see some totals, total expenditures on the next page categorized up in the general fund. That continues, energy services, materials and supplies, capital outlay. And then on the next page, it's at the top, I don't know that it is page 5, it's listed as page 5. Again, the AFR is a sort of a panoramic, but a snapshot nonetheless. Kevin, can you help me understand? Because I think when I don't know if it's because of the way I'm describing it or it just doesn't seem like we're sort of landing in the same place. If I'm reading these sheets correctly, from page 5 and to the next page, and it says transfers in at the top, and then the last line says total fund balance. The transfers in from capital projects funds, transfers in from revenue funds, not residue. That's a whole other thing. What is that referring to?
So we have on a regular basis, let me talk about the first one first. We have on a regular basis, what we do is we look at what expenditures the operating fund occurs, within capital outlay expenses, for example, operating fund like computers, like some maintenance personnel, to be on project. We identify another big issue in there is project management. We love to reimburse ourselves sometimes with project management based upon state law. So on a regular basis, we transfer about that same dollar, about $20 million every year to reimburse the operating fund for expenses that are allowable under capital outlay. That's going to be a practice for us and pretty much every district out of the state.
Gotcha.
The second one is an anomaly. That one relates to the allowability that we had to expend some of the ESSER funding last year at the end of last year. And that's the one that we identified expense within the operating fund. That was limit under that expense, under that allocation, and we reimburse the operating fund to do it reserve.
Creating the special ESSER reserve.
Basically, yes.
Okay. And that's how much?
So at that time, it was 30 million. But remember, the bulk of that was utilized this year. We paid for our expenses that had not been allocated to improve it. And also the significant decrease in funding that we experienced on the Fed amounts.
Okay, so that actually went, I see what you mean. Okay. It's sort of treating it as a balance sheet, but in other words, there was no legal reason why we couldn't use that ESSER reserve to reimburse ourselves, right, from the loss or the hit that we took from the mid-year increase in the family empowerment.
It wasn't very stuff, right? Just you know, it becomes funding for the operating fund.
Right, it's, in other words, it's just, it's
So-
general, it's funding.
So where we wind up with the bottom line is all funding. I guess that's.
With some exceptions, there are some funds and some categoricals, I know that we agree on this, that can only be spent for a particular thing, but what I'm trying to show here is that the idea of transferring in is not completely, as we sort of ran into some locked horns a little bit last week, that the idea of transferring funds in and out from the reserve to the general fund and even from some categoricals is not completely, like you mentioned, legal. It's that it's only under certain circumstances, correct? Okay. So as we keep going a little bit further down. Actually, if you go to transfers out, that 9,700 and it's a zero. Can you tell me a little bit about 9,700 in general, what that does?
Yeah, it's only down.
Sorry,
And you know, it's only down.
that's, I love it.
So
Oh, goodness, break it all day.
every.
I love it because I learned.
Yeah, every transfer in has had an equal offset and transfer out, right? So you can fund account, so you can fund sources, so you have the operating. You can the operating expenses. You have that service fund, which is used to pay for transport for which is capital outlay, is used to purchase infrastructure, buildings, one buses, you know, special revenue funds, which is constitutes Title I, Title II, IDEA, and then those special funds. We also have special revenue funds that were allocated in ESSER and CAR. And then you have food service and finance and service funds, which is what it's compensation. Health things. So whenever I have a transfer in, I have to transfer out in some other fund. So if you look at 9,700, that's an expense. The other one's 36, that's a 3,800, that's a revenue. So I would, when I do it, when a transfer happens, you show an expense out of a fund, that's the donating fund, if you will. So if you don't want to get capital outlay transfer, you'll see a 9,700 expense in the capital outlay fund. And on the opposite side of the operating fund is the exact same dollar coming from the operating fund.
Just from an accounting perspective, just the way that we write, the way that, okay, so, but what drives that is, a deficiency in a particular,
Not really a deficiency,
deficiency.
I mean, in certain cases, it's.
We need money in this account, so we have to show where it's
You can't, no, you can't do that. It has to be allowable expenses, so.
Sure.
Example is capital outlay, so, you know, we encourage them to put in capital outlay fund. A good example of that is, a portion of, technology technicians. That work, CIS and spend a bit of their time, that's a significant part of the time. Working on actual assets, working on, you're replacing parts and stuff, so all that stuff is what happens. Parts that we purchase on maintenance department, all allow the investment. And so this large transfer is this salaries that we can identify. Like, for example, if we have one maintenance staff, you can't pay salary, I say that, you can't charge the out on the salaries to that level.
Sure,
So what happens is we have people that work for us, for example, maintenance department. They could be working on the 85, let's say the high school. Parts of their salaries are reimbursable by capital and transfer money from capital.
but only that part of their salary that's been
So
qualified.
I can't just buy operation transfer back or
Sure.
for allowable reimbursement.
Okay, gotcha. So, and it's, is it ever legal to permissible to do it an entire salary?
It depends.
Okay,
I don't know what the person is doing, the case capital outlay. If I have somebody working 100%, I have to see any what's done. That somebody's working 100% on it, I'm only doing capital outlay, but they will go out there.
those project based.
Yeah, and we pretty much maximize what we do.
That's good.
When I became CFO, I look back, this year was and that was a significant financial downturn of the last recession, so if we look at it, it's much better, what other business do, that's allowable, it's not.
Mhm.
And the maximum. Significant, as well as, sadly, there are different ordering groups that are different districts, so Palm Beach County, it doesn't transfer. Right. It's the same, but We follow the statute, the prison statute, it's fairly clear what's in the statute. What the order is, use group concept.
So it's not so much that, so if I understand correctly, it's not so much that there is, correct me, if I'm misstating, please do correct me. It's not so much that the law says that you can't, well, it establishes parameters around what you can and can't do. Does the law give us a limit to that? Is there some sort of percentage limit, or is that imposed by auditors?
No, it's really not, it's imposed by what the expenditure is. So there's a limitation on the country, so that would be allowed.
But that's a natural limit by just the existence of the,
It's there, there's no limit
Right.
to that.
okay,
Like if I have a lot of funds,
gotcha. So there's, okay, got
So
it. So I just wanted to understand if there was any kind of statute. Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, we say we budget, we put into the general fund budget. So the difference between these is categorical, which actually I think you see outlined on the next page a little bit, maybe a little bit more clearly. I'm sorry, it's not numbered. At the top, it says, unexpended return to FDOE, and then the first line is, mental health assistance at the FD earmark. Right. So this is a list of categoricals from state funding. Okay. So then so kind of with our hand here, right? And this is, I think, what I was failing to articulate clearly last week. We've got these earmarks that cannot be used for other items. This money is specifically tied to FDFP. It's based on the number of students. It has to be used for this particular purpose. However, because we've had this discussion about the potential for transfers, limitations on it, but the potential for transfers, I want to add to this next page. If you look at these categoricals, the unexpended now I see that it says returned in 2021 0. So we returned 0 to the DOE as we returned 0 to the DOE. It's not like we were left to be at the end of the year and we couldn't put them into any other accounts. So we had to send it back to the DOE. So that's good. You don't want numbers there, right? You want to use everything you have available to you. But I do think that the unexpended piece is, I have a question about that. When it says unexpended, does that mean that at the end of 2021, that first sort of not the account number, but the first column where you've got some amount numbers going down, mental health is at 990,000, you go a little bit further down, instructional materials is at 650,000, so forth. Does that mean when it says unexpended, is that at the end of 2021?
Yes.
Okay, so that is the book at the end of 2021, we had 990,000 left under mental health assistance for FEFP earmark. But I see, I'm sorry, sorry, yeah, first time,
Yeah, that was right.
sorry. It's just sort of it's just sort of it doesn't get into the, there's a little bit more detail on the next page, but this is, I think, a summary, right? So just as an example, for mental health assistance, $990,000 left over in that FEFP earmark, but we did not return it to the DOE. Where does it go? Okay, I got you. And you see it a little bit further down, and this is somewhat what we talked a little bit last week about it, instructional materials, similar. Right, but this is from okay, so this is from 2021. And then you're saying that 990,000 under mental health. Well, actually, I'm sorry, let's just focus on instructional materials, 653,000.
2020. Yeah, it's 653,020. I was looking at 3.20.
Sorry. So 653,000 in 2021 under the FEF, that's an FEFP earmark, so it must be used for instructional materials. Okay. But we saved that, basically. It was unexpended, and so we rolled it into that same category, right? But if we go back, and I'm sorry, I didn't make copies of this because it was just you know, it's a publicly released document. I guess I just wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive on that particular part. If you go into the 21-22 district summary budget, I'm only comparing that, not our current budget, the one that the proposed budget, but I'm just comparing the one last year that was adopted and was built off of these numbers. Yeah. So if we go to instructional under appropriations, this is the one that was submitted to the state. Sorry. You'll have to take my word for it, but, and Kevin, I'm sure you'll tell me if my numbers are incorrect, but if you go to instructional materials, things like instructional related technology, purchase, materials and supplies, right? That we had an 11 million, I think. Remember, does that sound right?
You're expecting that number, right?
Yeah.
I'm kind of good about that.
I know you're good. So I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly. Sorry, I hate to do that when there's a green screen. But if I'm reading this correctly, this is the DSB, right? And I go to like just instructional materials and supply, because that's the biggest one, is 11 million, right? Under instructional.
This is, well, no, it's that would be salaries.
Oh, salaries, sorry, salaries are here.
Oh.
Salaries, employee benefits, purchase services, energy, materials and supplies.
Oh. Yeah, so,
11-ish.
well, that wouldn't just be, period. Any kind of materials, but classrooms. Paying for it. What we submitted,
Yeah, I mean, it could be.
that's not just this company.
Right, okay. So, but if I have, so at the end of this year, last year, I got the instructional materials earmarked, there's 600, and again, that's not, in a budget this size, it's not a massive number, though there are a handful of these. 653, just to speak of categorical, 650,000-ish was left in this earmark. But why then would there not be an offset here? So, for example, if we have that, now that's not a huge number, but let me reframe the question. Is there an offset? Is this budget reduced by that same amount?
No, it's not really. That's how we build it, so it happens. It's balanced out at the end of the year. Certain funding has slowest the next year, for example, number one. If I look at the public discussion about the whole, he has a balance of $10,000 at the end of the school year. She's like, it's reassuring that I can't write off this. Part of our money is the reality that he has any budget for time for schools, however, when they're discussing about it, they carry forward. So if the school ends with $20,000 discretionary budget, their annual allocation is $20,000. The beginning of next year, around $40,000. Construction materials. We're going to allocate from the state construction materials. In the case of 2021, 7.5 million. 7,552,000.
2021?
Okay. That gets added, that 653,000 gets added to that 7.5 million. So that one is going to be that whole fund. And then, as you see, that there's like $4.7 million balance. So it's not that's going to be like 3.4 million. I was mentioning that we have the documents as you probably know. Some years we have three textbooks, some years we have in the prior year we had enough money for our normal textbook option, but we knew we had the 2021 fiscal year. So I was going to guess that we some of that time so that we'll go.
So in terms of just the building of the budget, like you mentioned, so if we were in 2021, we started out with about 7 million in that categorical structural materials, and then we ended up at the end of the year with about 10%, a 650,000, so a little less than 10% left over. That gets rolled into the following year, correct?
Yes.
So the next year, we again got $7 million, it would be 7,653,000. Okay. So how then does that relate to the building of the budget under materials and supplies? Because if we have land, if we were left with, because this is where the connection, I think, is between the categoricals and the general fund.
Kind of go through.
Some,
Well,
but they're specific, they're specifically allocated from,
then, okay, you have to go through first. So I want to point out that the housing, you don't have to.
right, so there, it's used for general expenditures.
I want to further use that, but just have 5,000 inside of it.
Mhm.
That's part of what you can see the line. I would say is the textbook. And there were 7 pension expenditure. And if you in addition to that, before you'll see other supply. You'll see the objects. So textbooks are objects that are 5C1, 5C2. You'll see 051 will be supply. You'll see a bunch of other objects kind of
But it has to stay within that account. It's not like you can just transfer that out.
Yeah, but I assigned to assign a project to government revenue, what we don't receive. So that we know that the only thing that can be spent, that one be spent upon is the buying structure. So I can't, for example, say, okay, I had $653,000 of construction materials last year, that's a great thing, I could use that for something else, I can't.
Right, but if you have it left over, just like you said, from that Mr. Hendrick requested, that if we have this surplus at the end of the year, that be used to support the budget for the next year for the specific purpose of the textbook adoption.
Correct.
So what you have is the ability to, if not free those particular funds, it takes some pressure off of other.
I know where you're going, but what that says, and what happens in the case of textbooks, if I didn't have that, if I hadn't said that, let's say I wanted a textbook, and I spent 4 hours. I got a new allocation in fiscal year $7,000. But my textbook expense is 10. That means it's going to cost the general operating money of $50 million. So like,
Yes.
plan in that way, we set the money aside from the textbook allocation. So we will use textbook allocation.
So in other words, if it ended up coming in more and you were short, you come into offset and potential surplus, if it costs you more than you expect, or if there's.
So a great example of that is our CBIS allocation to Title 2 IDD data for the education services. We get an allocation to that within the IDD work allocation that. That's the CBIS. But we provide services like seed that amount. We provide formula allocated services that exist in that operating $2 million. And that's the only other place. But what happens if we had overexpended our product, materials allocated, and it often happens. Often happens that the state says you have to do a math and science adoption, and it's going to cost you $14 million. By the way, there's a revenue set on account. That means it's an impact to the operating fund adversely. Because the money is a one-time expense, typically, for the money that they have to do it fiscal year and pay for stuff materials that we must adopt in that year.
So the savings that you yield in any particular, even from categorical, the savings that you yield in any particular year are not every categorical can do this. I understand that not all of them can roll because, for example, we had that drawback of funds to the state last year that was, sort of unprecedented and nobody could have seen that. It did allow us to draw down some other expenses in order to return less to the state, which is the appropriate use. But I'm wanting to, if I'm understanding correctly, when we save in the budget, that goes into, it either goes into the reserve, in other words, nobody except for a school. No one is starting over with, oh, I saved money last year, and so I've got a bunch of extra money this year. And that in that way, it's different from like a household budget that goes back into the general fund to be reallocated. Again, schools operate slightly differently because of what's specific to them. But those savings could, at the end of the year, either transfer by one mechanism, could either go into the budgeting for the following year, like we talked about with the instructional, the savings that we had under instructional materials, or would go into the reserve.
Yes or no. If you have the reserve is created, the fund balance is created by the operation taxes over time, right? So the budget is that I started off today. My very first thing was at the end of this year, I had $100,000 in sales, and my expenses $50,000. Retained earnings or fund balance is really about $50,000. That means everything like the inbound next year, let's say the next year, I have the same sale, $100,000, I print to 150, then my reserve goes to zero. So it's constant up and down based on the sure.
And you
To your
created the
point,
chart
however,
page.
that is not, those savings that you found, that's how we take the raises. Basically. That's what afforded the opportunity to do this. For example, in this last fiscal year, the 2021-22 fiscal year, we had a reduction from the state of $17 million overall. In addition to that, we have a reduction of $20 million. We're just off the $17 million. How could they afford $17 million? Afford raises in that environment, losing $17 million in revenue? The way we afford it is by able to our allocation of instruction. It's based upon fluctuations.
I think you said that was something like savings of 14 million.
Sorry.
Wasn't that something like savings for about 14 million?
That's the coming fiscal year. In the prior fiscal year, it was about the same, about $15 million. So the savings so that's basically us. When you look at the year-end budget, you look at okay, what were the results of my operations last year? The result of my operations last year that had a positive $30 million. That sounds good, but that was the increase that was very. In reality, we would have had about $103 to $5 million reduction on the offset. We would have got that reserve was set aside. Come fast forward this year, with the reduction of revenue, with the raises, and the decrease in revenue for the year, you're going to see our reserve go down because that's what this rate for. Our intention is to, of course, this extra part is to get to the point we have a level of reserve and the fund to give us a chance for the bill. But generally, what you're pointing to is the way we're using the raises. We're not necessarily getting increases in revenue from the state and what we did this coming fiscal year. But we have reductions for a couple of reasons. Like one of the state allocated us to the other behaviors. You look at the militants, look at the foreign local backward, because that fits part of the way that they go. The foreign local level this year is the lowest ever. The data back is 12%. So that's causing reduction in the other one. That's a kind of reduction of students. And which is are going down. And it's been going up with over the 10 years. We were as much as 113,000 students. And in that, the charter school, we could just 113,000 students. So we have constant pressure. So my point is, even in a year where we had a reduction, and believe me, last year, I was really up because of that. I think that we should raise it to 3.25%. We up $20 million it's coming down to the race, but we did make a reductions this time because we had abilities to reshift some stuff. And you know, it was okay, and still, you know, our excess of revenue that was trying to it's fairly high. So it is, but mainly because of this factor. Revenue, about 17 million.
And I don't know, like I said, I don't have we don't yet have, and that's completely normal. The AFR for last year's, we're just working on the previous year's list, but it helps me to understand better, and I think for us to state here that when we talk about a pot of money, or we talk about a recurring source of revenue or a non-recurring source of revenue, recurring expense, all of those things are fluid. They're fluid in the sense that it is not as though, just like you said, there is a and I think that people, when they're listening to it, tend to think, well, I operate a household budget in particular. It not from the revenue to the expenditure for the district budget operates differently from that. The big concept is the same, like you said, expenditures over revenue. We hope to have fewer expenditures than revenue from a savings perspective. But that doesn't necessarily hold true, nor does the sort of concrete nature of moving money from one pot to another account to another line item to another pot to another. When the way that you keep your schools operational is to pay your people to stay there. Like that, I mean, it's basic as that. I think that while as a teacher and obviously as a CDA, we all come to this table, y'all are, you know, former educators, come to the table with an understanding of the reason people do this work. But when But especially facing the kind of pressures that they're facing in their, that they're under in their personal lives for feeding their families, they don't have, our people don't have the, I don't want to use the word luxury because I think that mischaracterizes it. They don't have the choice to say, well, I've got this sort of long-term planning idea that I have, that I have a savings goal, or I really want to save for this project. If I save now, then I'll be able to buy this in the following year. It's not to say that no one is doing that, but I think we can all agree, and I think if we surveyed, we probably see that people are looking at what they have to do to keep roofs over their heads, food on their table now. They do not. And again, my household budget is much less complex than what the district works with. But even we don't have the ability to say that to meet this particular savings goal, I am going to not put what I need to do into the operation of my house, the operation of my household budget, the day-to-day, let's keep this going, let's keep our family afloat. And when we talk about inflation at 11.2, maybe we have the updated numbers from August. I honestly don't know. Usually it falls around, I think, between the 10th and the 15th. When we talk about those pressures, as well as our agreement that there are inflationary factors that are continuing, that really, if not erase, then certainly put a damper on our hope that inflation will fall as fast or as severely as it grows. Characterizing this movement of what is recurring, what is non-recurring, what's this pot of money, what's that, what's reserve, what's categorical, and treating it as though we can't be creative in the way that we bring these funds together, particularly when just that one and again, I know this is 2 years ago, and adding the ESSER funds has made it more complicated, not necessarily worse, just more complicated. When we just look at that example of savings from instructional materials that was rolled into the following year to take care of an anticipated expense, and that was 2.5 times more than the distance between us when we look at this this simple across the board pay raise. It's difficult for us to justify to our people why the district can't make that happen. I understand the way that it's budgeted. I have, you answered my questions about how the money can be moved. Is there a limit to it? No, but it potentially affects our, it can have an actuarial impact on us. I mean, there's a number of different factors that make it more complicated, but when it gets down to it, when the district saves money, it gets turned over into expenses in the following year. And whatever we weren't able to anticipate at the beginning of last year, I don't know, like I said, I don't know totally where we landed, but where we weren't able to anticipate when we began last year, we knew by the end of the year, we knew over the summer that the inflationary pressures that we were facing created the exact same kind of unexpected expense that we would treat something like a textbook adoption bond much too expensive. I know there was a food service issue last year where we lost our food provider, or our vendor in the middle of the year, and that increased not just our cost of food, but also the transportation, because they didn't come in. And we talked about that at one point. They came in not paying for, or rather they would deliver to one site, and we had to take care of the transportation expenses to get them out. Like, those things are unexpected. The increase in the family empowerment scholarship, though I don't know if we should expect it, but certainly it wasn't worked into our budget. The pressures facing our people to keep them in the classroom are exactly that. That is exactly what's happening. It is the rainy day. So whether you look at it as transfers from different categoricals, whether you look at it as saving over here to free up money over here, whether you look at it as dipping into the reserve, or rather not contributing as much, realistically not contributing as much to the reserve this year to keep our people paid and to keep our people here, that is just as much, if not more, of a pressing, urgent situation than anything else that we faced. So I don't agree. I continue to disagree with the idea that in order to make that meaningful, which is, by the way, significantly under the offer that we came to the table with initially, the gap that needs to be bridged between where we are 4 with PCS, your most recent offer was 4, our last was 5.5. The difference there of 300, 500,000, 300,000, I have to go back and work between my spreadsheet. Looking at all these numbers, it is very difficult for me to accept that that's just not something. And I know that y'all were gonna look at your numbers to try to find a way to swing it. I plugged in the numbers that y'all had, y'all settled with SEIU. Doing that for our unit would be, like I said, 3 times as much as what we're asking for. I have a hard time understanding how we can't make that.
Okay, so, thank you. I wanted to hear from you today and I'm just gonna take this right now and just kind of move to our proposal to you that we would like for you to, look over and discuss. I'm gonna actually give you, well, I'll just put this.
Okay.
Again, we'd like for you to review it. If you want to come back and present a counter, we can step out, but, so we recognize the work going on and the needs. So we are moving it to 4.25%. For $15, again, same step, same verbiage, right, that we've used before. 100% of healthcare costs. And we have the $150 in there that we did, put out last time. And again, I know you said 324, 300, it'll be,
Yeah,
it'll be
it's-
shifting around there. And again, one of the other reasons we had them, again, I think we talked with your group particularly, was the concern about the different people at the different levels. So we wanted to say 150 for every employee for the equivalent of that, and you can decide where you lay that, to the people, in your group. So if you have any questions, I think it's pretty straightforward, but we can step out and let you have a conversation, you can come back. As you know, we are, it's always our intent to, to come to an agreement so that we can get this to our employees as soon as possible. And so if we'd like to just, spend some time today going back and forth, and we just,
Yeah, and without the
Would
added
be willing to-
statutory pressures, if needed to
correct.
hopefully have I know we've stated that before, but the state requires us to have this in place by October 1st. I don't know what happens after that. I don't know if y'all have heard anything.
Well, I
What
think,
happens?
I think our goal should be, let's see if we can get an agreement. That's the best thing for everybody, involved before we go into that. So we can step out or you can step out, whichever one you want.
We'll step out. We'll just hop over in here because there's 2 of us, so that's okay.
You're gonna put pause on that?
Yeah, we'll pause it. So you can see that it's already muted, but I'll take this out. This is the one that's important to have.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know. There was a different one. Yeah. Right. Sorry. I'm not techie, but it's a hat that I wanted to wear and I don't, it was very successful. Okay. So we looked at, your, just talking about your proposal for the unit. And comparing it to our most recent proposal, so it looks like at 4.25, that is an increase of approximately 2.6 to the unit from last year, so an increase from 2.6. Are just to get everyone to the minimum of 15 is 1.4. So about 1.2 million more than we have to do technically by statute. Obviously, we want to do better for our our veteran employees as well. Our last was our last offer was 5. That was we've also offered 300,000, approximately 300,000, 150 each, and a one-time payment and 100% of healthcare costs, which is for this unit, the value is about $60,000. Our most recent was 5.5, so we most recent 5.5 at a cost of 3. That's about 3.18 of an increase, or 3.2 of an increase. Again, we're still only about 60,000. I'm sorry, $600,000 apart. And we also discussed last week, because the last time we met was the first time since Pasco had settled, and they had settled at 5.4. And we recognize that. So we recognized that Pasco was making up for a sort of a deficit from last year. There was no recurring salary increase in Pasco last year on either side, instructional or support, to my knowledge. So their increase of 5.4 was getting them up from a place that was certainly starting below where we were. We have been successful in negotiating raises every year. But I think what we also have to consider about Pasco is if we can look backwards, then we can certainly look forward as well. And one of the challenges that we think we've said might face in relationship to Pasco and to a certain extent Manatee is our people's ability to move to Pasco. The cost of living is lower. And also next year they've just passed, thankfully, they have just passed a referendum that includes ESPs that will bill this year, but come into play during next year's bargaining. And that's not something that we have the opportunity to do here for another 2 years. Well, that would be running 2 years. So if we're kind of planning, if we're looking at comparing backwards, if we compare forwards as well, we have to make sure that we're thinking about the long term in keeping our people here and making it affordable for them to do so. So to that end, instead of we've made or prepared to counter slightly a larger step from what we have been doing, and go from 3 points. I'm sorry, to go to 5%. 5% or $15, increase $15, whichever is greater, which I think we all agree is the correct approach to use here. 100% health insurance, no one-time payment.
Can
Yeah.
you're pausing. so
Sure.
you-
Yeah, I was just looking over some.
No,
leftovers.
you're
Go
okay.
ahead.
I just didn't know.
No.
So, so I appreciate the counter. I believe we have talked, each time we've come together, it's been great. I mean, we've been having that conversation. We originally came in 3.25, and that was a stretch. And when we talk about these percentages, I hear what you're saying, and I have nothing, we're not gonna sit here and argue with anything about cost of living. We've been dealing with Pasco and Manatee in that sense for decades, right? I mean, there's the only difference now, the major difference now is just this inflation that we're dealing with specifically in our county here, and we recognize that. We have talked about the percentage increase. It is recurring. It is something that we have to take into consideration when we are planning for years to come, because our intent, as you mentioned right at the beginning, when you're talking about Pasco, who did a one-time supplement last year and doing catch-up. If you take in our 4.25 and our 3.25 from last year, that's 7.5. No, I'm not doing my math right. That's 6.5. No, it's 7. Am I right with my first? 4 quarter. Oh my goodness, it's only Monday. Too. Just let me know if we need to figure it out. Okay, which is a 7.5.
It sounded like more of an electrical issue than something in
It
the
did
building.
seem like, yeah, off there. So if you're looking at, I mean, we are outpacing them as well. And it's not about, I understand, I don't want to make it a conflict. We have to recognize what our neighboring districts are doing.
Yes.
We are trying to do whatever we possibly can do for our employees, which is that 4.25 is pretty much and it's a full percent more than what Mr. Smith is even comfortable with doing. And I know we talked about that as well. So is there, I mean, where do we stand today? I mean, we have come in 4.25 on a recurring increase is as high as we can go. Is there any thought of or thoughts on your side of where we can settle this? And if you want us to step out, we'll step out.
We ran, I mean, I have a hard time seeing this as. I don't know if I win for either one, but
We really feel a 4.25 is a very generous proposal to our employees who so well deserve anything that we can give them. We have stretched and we have looked and we've gone back, and trust me when we say that we have seriously gone back and have this discussion and have looked at our numbers. And it is that recurring, and I know we talk about it, we don't talk about it, but we have to be prepared. I do not want to have to, I don't want to set us up for future of not providing increases or cutting positions. And that's what we're trying very desperately to make sure that we have that moving forward. So again, I'm going to ask if there's anything that you can see that we could possibly have the conversations going back and forth to settle in today. And if not, if we need to step away and you need to regroup, we need to regroup, that's
let me
fine.
take can I ask a question, not to. So all I have is I have our bargaining unit. I don't have SCIU, but to try to understand better recognizing
Well,
everything you said
Right,
and agreeing with the fact that 4.25, having started at 3.25, I think under normal circumstances is a generous offer. I'm not sort of suggesting that y'all have not worked hard to get to that point. I am though saying, as I've continued to say,
Mhm.
and y'all have, I think, I know we keep repeating the same thing, but it's important stuff
Mhm.
that we have to think not just about, we have to think about supply and demand.
Absolutely.
And when we think about the demands that are placed on, I mean, looking at that as the demands that are placed on people that are keeping them here,
Correct.
or rather are working against them being here. And that's a weird way to think about it. I think all as educators, we tend to think of there being a sort of internally driven to this work. But I think that we have reached a point where the external pressures are making that difficult to balance, you know?
We have no,
Yeah.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm
I just
also,
want to
you know,
acknowledge that it's not,
and I-
that we're
and I
not
can-
suggesting that y'all are being generous.
No.
I get that.
and listen, and I know we have people listening, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure everyone is hearing, you know, both sides, both, you know, and the pros and cons for
Right.
both ways. And when we are continuing to pick up 100% of healthcare, I think that if we're talking about what's, you're mentioning what's maybe preventing people from staying, but I'm talking about things that we're doing that are continuing people, that are allowing
Keeping
people
trying
to
to
stay
make it
here. And I'm gonna tell you, our benefits is a major issue, and I will tell you, especially in our groups, that we're here talking about PESPA. You know, that is a big selling point and a big, a benefit to keep our people here, because, you know, yes, you have to be able to have a roof over your head, and you have to have food on the table, and you have clothes on your back. But you also need to have, and a lot of our people need to make sure that they have those good benefits. And so we've recognized that, and that is something else that we've put out. So it's not going down to being put down onto the employee as well. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. There is, the benefits are important. I think we determined previously that the difference between 75% coverage of the increase within the PESPA unit, the difference there between 75% and 100% was of the increase. I want to make sure, because we still have the 80-20.
Oh,
But you know, I
But
don't
there's
want to,
no-
I don't want to
you're right.
explain it in a way that's not correct. You're right, confusing. But that difference between 100% coverage of the increase and 75% coverage of the increase is about $60,000 with this unit. I don't know how that landed on SEIU's side, because I don't work with their unit, but are you able to, because I know you produced, you know, I'm assuming that you would produce something like this for SEIU. At the 4.25% plus the 450 one-time payment for them, how did that price out? Or what was the total value of that package for them? I'm just making,
I don't have that. I have my PESPA group with me. I have my
Okay.
PESPA folder.
okay, that, I think that probably that would be, we can find out, but I
No, I
y'all might
can, I
have,
just don't have it.
but you might just know. it. So at that,
But, you know, we're here bargaining for PESPA right now, so I'm not, I mean, that's information, yes, we can get, I'm not gonna pull that up and send that, but,
we're bargaining for PESPA, but as you said, we have to, and I think the way that this was presented from the beginning was that we're looking at the cost facing the district, and like Kevin had mentioned, that we work with increases from the surplus. I don't, you know, I think that it's just sort of like active and passive savings. You plan to save so much and then you end up saving some. I think that's the same way with increases. We have to look at, we need to plan to increase people's salaries, and if we're able to do it like in the ESSER funds or ARC funds or something like that, in an sort of in an additional way, that's good.
which we did for PESPA last year with the $350.
And
Not a one time, and the thousands that we were not required, or that we did, I'm sorry, we're not required, but we were not even funded for that to do.
Yeah, y'all
So
chose to do it, and it was the right
it was
thing
the
to do.
right thing to
Absolutely.
do. So PESPA unit, you know, was provided $1,000 plus the 350. And that was not the same across all the bargaining groups last year. So
Yeah.
every year we are bargaining
Yeah.
for your group.
Yeah.
So again,
So I think that when we're talking, when I asked about SEIU, it's to get an
Mhm.
idea of because they settled. How much we have to, you know, to work with them in the big picture, and we haven't settled PCTA, which is a whole other variable, so I get it, none of this is perfect.
well, and as we started to say, you know, which this pot of 18.4 has grown, and it's because of those extra things that we could go find in other places to get grown significantly. It is what it is. We're still at that point. So, so what else can we do?
We prepared. And they're rough numbers.
You prepared?
I
rough numbers,
prepared
I'm
some-
not sure,
yeah.
a counter?
No, yeah, not so much a counter, it's just some calculations, but it gets us closer. again, there was so much more in a one-time payment, so we also looked at 4.75, slightly less of a, or slightly slower of a decrease at the 150 per person one-time payment, acknowledging that that probably wouldn't end up being 150 per person because of the size of the increase that the people that are up from on a level like that at 4.75, it would be everybody. Yeah, so that's still catches our 14. So at that level, at 4.75, everybody. Well, anyway, we probably wouldn't be allocating that $150 to the people that got more than a 4.75 increase. Like, just like you said, that the total amount was 300, was about 300,000-ish to allocate. So I'm not totally prepared to figure out how to allocate that, but that was our additional movement, was to go to 4.75 with the 300,000 or $150 per person one-time payment. With 100% health insurance. Again, I think that there's the difference between 175 can make a big difference for an individual family, but it's such a small difference for in the big picture here. That would put us at 2 that amount, that flat amount would be 2.9 million increase versus 3.004. So it's like a $10,000 difference, slightly. And then, but it would be about
So Lindsay, I love the thought. I do love the dollars going back and forth. The issue is the recurring. I appreciate you talking 4.75. 4.25 recurring is we're at the edge that we cannot go over that edge. And that's where we start talking about what are some other one time. And I understand what you're saying. I fully understand. And I'm not, the numbers are there. You're doing the number crunching. It is the recurring that we cannot go above that 4.25.
So just to make sure I understand, just so you're using, I want to make sure we're speaking the same language. You're saying that you're 4.25, and I get that you're looking at 4.25 plus the 150. I get that. You're saying that 4.25 is your final offer on a recurring.
Yes.
All right, can we do another conference if that's okay? I'm sorry to
We
be
can walk out.
staccato.
We'll walk out.
What is there?
Yeah, we'll go. Hard, and then I'm gonna move over.
Oh, yeah, no,
Yes, that's-
yeah.
Let it turn a little bit, and I'll move over. So this going down to dives.
Sorry. Sorry, just coming back in from coffee.
There's only one in there? There's only one. But she's got somebody else that's gonna go there, but she's having out talking. You know, cousin's been.
Okay, so we're talking coffees. Okay, thank you for coming back in. Sure. We. So, we all obviously know that language is important and that, and we heard what you said about the 4.25 being your last offer on a recurring bonus, and while that is significantly less than we have, significantly less than what we came to the table with, it's still a percentage point higher than y'all came to the table with, and with the the offer to find to first of all to cover the health insurance increase at 100%, and the offer of a one-time payment as a sort of a little bit of a stimulus for our people, that's we decided to come closer to you on the 4.25. But in order to make that something like having a similar effect on people's financial situation now, the stimulus, or rather the one-time payment would need to be higher. We think that, especially given the federal funds that are available, and I guess in the hopes of potentially seeing additional state as an additional state payment, as you said, Kevin, this is an election year, so I do have some hope between now and November. We'd like to propose a 4.25 increase, 4.25 or $15 an hour, whichever is greater, 100% coverage of the health insurance, increased cost, and $1,000 one-time payment. Now, again, it might end up being that's across the board. Whether that was distributed in the same way or not, to those who had more of an increase, we'd have to do some calculations on that. It's a significant amount, but it is non-recurring. So $4.25,000 individual or one-time payment and 100% coverage of the health insurance.
So that 1,000 to the 150 is a significant difference, and that is something that we cannot, accept at this time. Is there any discussion of coming to somewhere between 150 and 1,000, which is extremely? And there is nothing that I don't think we could get. If we come back at 900, we can't do that either.
So the 450 that we offered SEIU that you referred to, that was because PESPA group had received 350 last year. So that's the basis of that. We're not going to be playing one group against another and go to 1,000 because you take the 450 and double it and then add some to PESPA. We can't do that. We're way at the end of what's available to the
Yeah, but
budget.
remember, I see you said it before us, so whatever they did before, like I just said, we're not negotiating about PCTA, we're negotiating about PESPA.
Right.
And they settled earlier, and we settled after, and we look for our people, so that's what we're on the table, so.
That's fine. I'm just saying that's where that dollar amount came from.
And we went up 100
Yeah.
with them through negotiations.
Yeah, I look at last year as being exactly that. I don't think it's playing groups against each other. I think it's negotiations. It's bargaining. So I don't think that that practice in itself is anything, it is the right way to do it, actually. I don't think there's a problem with it, but I do understand that since we have met y'all in the middle on the recurring increase, which is significantly lower, and through this whole process, I've identified ways to do it. But taking you at your word that that was your final offer on the recurring increase, we have met that, but in order to make that meaningful for our people, it, again, taking a snapshot of what the district finances are, taking a snapshot of what their individual finances are, their family finances now. $1,000 is what would make that a meaningful increase. Now, we are open to counter offers on that one-time payment. But I do think that we need to consider that.
You can give us 2
Okay.
minutes, it won't be a long.
No, sure.
Step out for 2 minutes.
Thanks.
Phone?
You're fine. No, it's fine.
No, because that's what I did because the report was fast. Okay.
That is correct. You say that incorrectly. Hey guys, we're going into a caucus. Okay, we're back. It's 4 people.
Okay, so, thank you for your counter. We just needed a little discussion. So here is what our offer is at this point. 4.25%, is 100% healthcare, the raise in healthcare costs. And we can double the one-time payment offer of $150 to $300 per employee.
Just, can you get, can you go to the second? Please? I know, this is, it's like.
I'm down here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Season, experience.
See you. Anyway, we don't want to work.
Good job, I think.
That's a to this one.
Recognizing history. Back on. Okay.
Okay, let's do their second one. Alfred.
So your last, offer on the table was 4.25, or 15, whichever is greater. For, with a $300 one-time payment and 100% of the healthcare costs, the healthcare increase, sorry. Let me make sure to be clear about that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so we, but again, in order to make this, in order to be a meaningful increase, not just to our employees that are going to 15, which is for some a significant increase, just based on the statutory requirement. But also those, our veteran employees and those at the very top of the scale, we will counter with a $600 one-time payment. The 4.25, or 15, whichever is greater, and then 100% of the healthcare costs. That, of course, what that's going to mean in terms of an effective percentage increase or the bonus is going to vary across the scale. And I've also calculated that for everybody in the unit. And so you may have people who are on, leave or whatever it is. You also, that's also, I'm calculating that based on a full, I'm calculating it based on full time, but we do have some employees that are part-time, so that everybody's in that mix. And that would be our. Knowing that again, acknowledging the one-time payment nature of it, that's because of special funding and that was a separate amount of 1.25.
It's. We're not gonna be able to sell that right now, but I don't know if we need another time or if we just step away. Relook at this.
Yeah, I mean, we all have meetings coming up, and this is richer than we are prepared to do. We thought doubling was something that would seal the deal today, going up to 300,000. I'm sorry, total.
300,000.
Yeah. So. We can call it a day.
I know that y'all, I understand your weekly schedule, or your schedule this week is tough in the evenings, but we have available today.
We do. And we just have, I have a meeting at 2 o'clock. I've got to get back to.
Yeah, that's
I
okay.
can't do it. So if I could just if we could get back and then maybe I can touch base with you later.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we have,
A calendar.
freedom, yeah.
And then, so maybe I can look at the calendar. I
Okay.
just really, I've got to, there are things.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
all right. So we will schedule a time to meet, okay?
Thank you all for coming.
All right.
And thank you for, I know we all appreciate being able to go back and forth. It's more efficient.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Please watch the.
Yeah.
Reports.
I will not print it.